We've got a new submission from a disabled veteran who gives us her name and swears that she saw a very specific hairy cryptid later in the show. That's a pretty scary story. But first, here's an all-new allegedly true story that we call The Black and White Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, my first wife obsessed over black and white checkerboard patterns. It wasn't entirely her fault, as she had grown up in a house with black and white checkerboard patterns on more than half the floors and some of the wall detailing too. That was the house I moved into when we got married, as she was unwilling to move. None of that stuff mattered to me in the slightest at first, as it just seemed a quirk of her family lineage. Since our divorce, though, I look back on it as a sign of something inexplicable, which culminated in me having a terrifying Dogman experience. In fact, let's skip straight to the Dogman part of this so that you can follow what I'm trying to tell you. My wife's house came with a generous amount of land surrounding it and behind it, including a fairly sizable woods, which connected on the far end to a state-protected forest land and animal sanctuary. When I first moved out there, I would gaze from the house out at those woods and wonder about them. As my relationship with my wife grew more distant, however, I found myself taking longer and longer hikes through those woods. I slowly got to know much of it, although I did try to scout out at least a bit of new land each week. It seemed as if no matter how far you went into there, you always found more to go. There was a morning in which my wife started an argument using words that hurt me deep within. I took off into the forest right then and there, canceling plans for the day so that I could be alone. I decided to map out a spot of the woods toward the north which I had never made time to get to before. It was going to take about 90 minutes just to hike to the place that I wanted to start exploring because it's all off trail and pretty heavily overgrown. It was more climbing than hiking for much of the way. Being in nature can sometimes really take your mind off of your troubles, so much so that you lose track of time and stray a little too far from home for a little too long. Since I dreaded the idea of going home and being insulted anymore, I had allowed myself to wander deep into the woods until it had already started to get dark. I wasn't lost, but had a long walk to get back. I resigned myself to having no choice and began to trudge back homeward. It was hard work, but the fun was removed. Since I no longer was heading off into the unknown, I was heading home to a failing marriage. My mood darkened as quickly as the evening sky until I was feeling pretty foul. My anger instantly transformed into fear as I noticed someone echoing my steps just behind me and to the right. I stopped, and they stopped. I stepped forward and heard them do the same. I didn't remember any echo on the way in, so I didn't think this was a natural echo that I was experiencing. I walked forward slowly, listening intently. The echo did not go away. In fact, I started to hear a second echo, slightly out of rhythm with the first one, which was slightly out of rhythm with me. This new sound of someone walking was behind me and to my left. I was being surrounded, but the woods were too dense for me to see who was doing it. I knew that we were heading toward a clearing, and I decided to stop at the very edge of that and hide, hoping that the two mysterious individuals following me would walk out into the clearing and reveal themselves. I kept telling myself that they weren't stalking me, that they just happened to be walking in the same direction as me, that's all. If I hid, and they kept walking, that would prove my theory correct. If they stopped when I stopped, though, then that would tell a different tale. What ended up happening, as so often happens in life, is that neither of these eventualities occurred. I did hide at the edge of the boundary of the clearing in the woods. I peeked out, hoping that I wasn't being seen, and I saw one single figure walking out into the field. This figure was so strange to the eye that my mind spun inside of my head. Have you ever seen one of those black and white dogs with floppy ears? I don't know if they're called spaniels or terriers, but this was sort of like a very serious one of those kinds of dogs, and he was doing this weird walk where he tilted back and held his front legs almost to his sides as he walked on his hind legs. I don't want to say he walked like a man because he didn't. He walked in this really weird bipedal manner that looked natural for him and worked fine, but it just wasn't the same way we walk. He had this taking care of business expression on his face that I'd never seen on that kind of dog. They usually seem so friendly to me, but this dog seemed like a boss, not someone's pet. He seemed to be looking around for something, and I realized with a start that it might be me. The dog turned to stare back at my part of the woods, and I rose to my feet because I felt a sudden need to escape. When I was standing, I could see that the dog was taller than I was, as in much taller, and its front legs were far more muscular than I had first noticed. They were more like arms than legs, in fact. This creature, when it was turned to face me, bore a resemblance to a mix between a bear, a man, an ape, and a canine or a wolf. I'm not saying it was actually interbred between all those species. I'm just saying that it had characteristics that reminded me of each. I was scared. I was panicked. The creature was like something out of an acid dream. I kept my eyes on him and I backed up slowly, moving step by step away from that upright walking nightmare. And then I bumped into something. I couldn't walk any further. Something warm and furry, growling, and much larger than I was. Turning around in horror, I saw that I had just walked backward into another one of those same upright dogs. This one, too, was black and white, and I felt as though I would soon be red all over. Our eyes met briefly, and he began barking loudly down at me, his hot, stinky dog breath being sprayed all over. Soon all three of us were in the clearing, the two of them barking at me from opposite sides. No matter where I turned or ran, there was one of them on my left and another one on my right. Or there was one in front and another behind. If I tried to run from one, I risked running into the other one. This was the one moment in my life that I would describe as hopeless. As in, I was hopelessly outmatched and doomed. There was nothing I could do to get away from one of them, and yet I had two. They toyed with me the way I've been told cats toy with mice. I got battered around somewhat brutally, but they were clearly not trying to end my life, at least, not just yet. As long as I fought back and tried to get away, it was still fun for them. They wanted to extend their play as long as they could manage. I suppose I should share with you what I remember about their appearance. As I said, these look like those very friendly black and white dogs you see with the white nose and the white stripe going up between their eyes. Only, these weren't friendly. They had chests and shoulders, more like men than any other kind of beast, and they had hind legs, like a dog or a cat, but they had that same big fluffy tail that you see on those black and white dogs, and that's why I keep thinking of it as a dog. The front paws were more like claws, the front legs were arms, so it was not a dog in the classic sense. They both had the dog face and dog ears and dog fur colorings and tails though, so they were more like canines than anything else. They had white bellies for the most part, but with darker spots and markings unique to each of them. They could have been brothers or sisters, but they were not exact twins. There were just enough minor differences that I could tell one from the other. I couldn't determine much personality difference, though, and I couldn't tell if one was the leader and the other was the follower. They just seemed to work as a well-oiled team, each knowing what would be the most annoying thing they could do to me in any given moment. I was tripped, pulled, pushed, and spun around till I was more than a little dizzy. Oh, and they smelled bad, too. At one point, I remember beginning to feel delirious, and I made a mad dash for the woods. I'm not sure if my growing feeling of insanity gave me the strength to evade the two monsters, or if they decided they felt like chasing me through the woods next, but the next part involved them trailing me as I began to hike, jog, and run back in those dark woods, heading back toward the checkered mansion and my equally checkered marriage. I was nearly sleepwalking. I was so stressed out that when I heard a loud explosion from not very far away, it sort of woke me up in a daze. I thought I was being fired upon, but then I caught sight of my wife's manservant. He had fired a shot over the heads of the dogmen, who seemed to have already fled the scene, since I could no longer see, hear, or smell them anywhere in the vicinity. Looking at the servant in his black and white checkered uniform made me almost feel as though he were dressed as the dogman, or the dogmen were dressed as him. I asked him how he knew where I was, and he told me that my wife told him where to find me. No matter how much more I quizzed him on our trek back, he wouldn't give me any more information. Since I was in an area I'd never been in before, there was no way she could have known I would be there. This experience was traumatizing to me, and I went away to stay with relatives the next morning. It was intended as a vacation, but I never really went back after that. Yes, I was and am afraid of those dogmen, but I'm even more unnerved about the rest of it. How did she know where I was? How did she know to send her man armed? Why did he not seem surprised at all at seeing the two big dogmen? Why did the dogs match my wife and her house and her staff? Black and white and black, checkerboard. While I was staying at my cousin's place, a friend of theirs started telling me wild tales about checkerboards, and how they're supposed to be a sign of the devil or masonry. I think to that person both were the same thing. I don't think my ex-wife is a mason, although it does seem possible to me that whatever ancestor built that house she lives in might have been. I don't think my ex is a Satanist either, but I do feel that something strange and unnatural is going on in and around that house. And even though I don't have undeniable evidence to prove that assertion, I feel certain in my gut that I was right to get away from that woman and that land. And what convinced me to leave was the black and white dogmen. Disabled War Vet presents her cryptid encounter. Sent in to us by Shelly Ann, LPN retired. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I just stumbled onto your channel this evening. So far, I enjoy the stories about the dogmen. I live in the Pacific Northwest, about 40 miles inland from the coast. I had a strange encounter during the summer of 2019. Up until 2019, I was very skeptical about the existence of the Sasquatch that roam our hills from the Pacific coast to near the summit of the Cascade Mountains. First, let's start with a little background. I was raised in a small rural town of about 800 people. Growing up, I tagged along with my dad when going hunting or fishing, and I loved the outdoors. I would prefer to go fishing or hunting with my dad to staying home playing with the neighborhood kids. Our deer season just happens to fall on Dad and my birthday, so every year while I was in the military, I took a month's leave to get in some hunting and a shot at the fall runs of steelhead and salmon with my dad. In other words, I have a lot of time in the bush and know probably 90% of the known animals in our area. Fast forward to January 1991. I had been out of the regular Navy and joined an Army Reserve MASH unit. I had just transferred to the IRR when I got the call that activated me for Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm. I finally left the Army Reserves in 1994 after nearly 27 years of service as a combat medic and pharmacy specialist. In 1987, I got my licensed practical nurse's license and went to work at our local VA medical center. After 8 years as a nurse, my service-connected disabilities began to get the best of me, and I was forced into retirement in 1999. I'm basically a retired psychiatric nurse who worked with the veterans who were being treated for PTSD. I am also a disabled combat veteran, having served in the Middle East in 1991. Now, to my encounter. It was the middle of the summer, July 19th, 2019, when my tomcat, Thomas Schattenjäger, got sick and I had to have him put down. Since the 1960s, we've been taking our pets up near a mountain pond to bury them amongst the trees. Because of the bear and big cat population, I carry a sidearm with me when in the bush up there. As I was finishing with the little grave, I caught a strong musky smell on the breeze, a smell somewhat like what a black bear boar puts off. I was thinking that I had a boar approaching me from upwind, coming up out of a small canyon to the only water source in the area. Not thinking the sound would have scared a wild animal with the noise, I clambered around into my .40 caliber Beretta. When I did that, there was a deep-throated huff, and something began stomping across a small hill behind me. Bear do not stomp. Whatever it was, it wanted me gone from near the pond. Because of the drought we were in, the pond was the only nearby water source. The creature circled me a couple of times. With each circuit around the pond, it would shake the young trees around as it passed them. These trees are about 15+ feet tall, with branches down to the ground. On the third circuit around, just about straight across the pond from our pet cemetery, the creature pushed down a snag. It was about 18-inch thick, about 20 feet tall. Then it let out a loud hoot. Then it just kept going. I finished burying Thomas and covered the tiny grave with some rocks to keep the predators from digging him up. By the time I finished, the creature had circled me about a half-dozen times. I was loading my tools into my pickup when a large rock, about the size of a large Hermiston watermelon, landed in the water barely 10 feet from where I was standing. I finished loading everything up, turned the pickup around, and headed for the main road and home. I was barely past the pond when an 8-foot-long, 4-inch thick piece of branch hit the back of the cab, then fell into the bed. About 3/4 of a mile down the road, I had to drive across a low-section road that had thick brush and skunk cabbage, and an almost dried-up, muddy swamp on both sides of the road. The brush was thick enough that you could hide a bull elephant in it. I was about halfway across the low spot when a huge rock came flying out of the brush and went through my windshield after leaving a deep gash in the hood. There were no cliffs along that side of the road for a rock to fall from. That rock went through the windshield and landed in the front seat. Try explaining that to your insurance agent. I went back up to the area a few weeks later with a video camera mount to record whatever crossed the road ahead of me. On this trip, another rock was thrown at the pickup. This one was smaller, only the size of a good-sized pomelo. When it hit, it took a 2-inch across round chip out of the windshield. The thrower remained hidden in the bush. It had not been another human, as we had had a thunderstorm the night before, which wet down the dust. On the way up, I did not see any fresh tire tracks in the dust of the road. When I got up to the gravesite and went down to check on it, I found a large, flat, river-washed rock on top of the new grave, a different type and color to the rocks closest to the Little Pet Cemetery. I had not been back up there this year to check on everything. On my last trip, I hung a small bag of apples on a branch high enough that a bear could not reach it, and thin enough that it could not hold the weight of anything bigger than a house cat. I stopped by last spring in 2020 to take a look to see if the apples were gone. The branch was snapped off and the apples, bag and all, were gone. Sitting up on what was left of the branch was a very crudely made stick doll, made out of small twigs and wrapped around with long pieces of cattail leaf fibers. I suspected that a few other close but unseen encounters may have happened with members of this hominid-like creature's family. Rocks have been thrown from amongst the trees along the shore of my favorite fishing lake, landing close enough that I got wet from the splashed water. I've heard calls while out hunting that I could not place to any of the animals that I'm familiar with. Also, I've seen a large dark figure standing close to a tree when out on one of the hikes with Dad into a wilderness area. When I asked him what it was, All Dad said was, "Never mind." There may have been others, too. That might have been one watching us when we were up in the Cascades. I do remember that musky smell, different than the smell of a month-old roadkill skunk-like stink that so many say they smell when they encounter one. I am no longer as skeptical of the idea that there might be, nor will I dismiss the idea of a large relic hominid creature roaming our hills and mountains. They may be friendly, or curious about us, but with hunters saying that they would shoot one on sight, they're probably a little scared of us when we go into the mountains carrying firearms. I'm pretty much stuck at home now because of a stroke a few years ago that has affected my sense of balance. However, I can still get out to drive and explore the back roads of where I live once in a while. I now have a digital video camera mounted so it can record what I come across on my drives and the things that I might see from the road. I do not go out to intentionally look for them, but it would be nice for this 70-year-old outdoors lady to get to see one before I can no longer get out at all. Signed, Shelly Ann, LPN, retired, U.S. Navy, U.S. Army Reserve. Bradley Poole, he's real cool, and I'm not talking out of school. Please join us in thanking Bradley Poole for making this episode possible. In exchange, Bradley gets to see our secret episodes, he gets to see our Wednesday previews, and so can you. Just join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com or click that join link under this or any of our videos. And now, here's international TV spokesdog Henry Lee Dogman to fill in the rest of the deets. Hank? Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it with your friends and family that you think might also be interested. If you would like to see more of our work, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon next to the subscribe button so that YouTube will alert you when we put out a new video. To become a channel member and gain access to our special perks, you can click that join link under each of our videos. Another option is to join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. You can join for as little as 99 cents on YouTube or $1.50 at peterbernard.com, and that gains you access to our weekly secret uncensored episodes. If you'd like to see our 21 hours of archives of uncensored Dogman stories, then please join at the $3 level or above. To get to watch our shows in advance of the public, please join at our $10 level. That gets you all the perks. If you join our channel memberships, you need to check our community page here on YouTube in order to get the links to the secret videos and other perks. If you're in the PayPal subscribers club, Peter will email you all the news and links himself. Once joining the PayPal club, which is Peter's homemade club, please give him a chance to see that you've joined and to compose you a personal welcome email, as none of that is automated. But whichever you join, we'll name you an executive producer for the next available episode. Do you have a scary experience that you'd like to share with us? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LA-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. It's a Google voicemail box, so that means it keeps cutting off after every 3 minutes. If your story is longer than that, please keep calling back and we can piece it together on our end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.